Believe it or not, you should be excited by the fact that TCU's offense had a moment of struggle against SMU. Oh, yeah, it's locked on Horned Frogs. Play my music.
You are Locked On Horned Frogs, your daily podcast on the TCU Horned Frogs. Part of the Locked On Podcast Network, your team every day.
What's going on, family? Welcome back to another episode of the Locked On Horned Frogs podcast, your number one daily one-stop shop for everything TCU athletics, Monday through Friday. Part of the Locked On Podcast Network, your team every day. And I, of course, am Darrion Gray, a.k.a. the Mouth of the South, 817 Raised, and today's episode is brought to you by Game Time. Download the Game Time app. Create an account and use the code LOCKEDONCollege to get $20 off your first purchase. We'll wrap up today's episode with a two-part based around the PFF grades for the Frogs. Defense, inspiring. Offense, surprising. And speaking of surprising, I think that I have a surprising stance about TCU's moments of struggle against the SMU defense on Saturday. I think that it was actually quite inspiring. I do. And I think that you should be excited by the fact that they struggled for a minute because it shows you what kind of offense they can be. Yesterday, we closed out the show discussing resilience, and we specified the fourth quarter in which SMU went up for a moment. TCU responded with a touchdown. Then they had a 3-and-out or forced a 3-and-out. Then they scored another touchdown, and then they forced an interception. Then they bled the clock. Then they forced another interception, and this was a two-way. This was offense and defense. This was looking at the entire team being resilient. But I want to look at resilient is another word to describe it, but I really want to look at the flow offensively for TCU on Saturday because we can talk about whether or not TCU is an elite offense, but if they're an elite offense, that has to work because it may sound crazy for me to sit here and say that you should be excited by a moment of struggle offensively. Who is excited by a moment of struggle? You may even question whether or not they struggled. They did. There was a moment where they hit a little bit of a wall. But I think the fact that TCU had their struggles and still dropped 35 points is extremely inspiring. I think it's extremely exciting. And I think it can really showcase what kind of offense that this is. Because an elite offense doesn't just have talent. Yes, you have to have talent in order to be an elite offense. It would be crazy to suggest otherwise. So don't allow me to say these intangibles being important mean that they are paramount, that they're above having talent. No, you need players like Hoover. You need players like Barnes, even though he didn't play this game. You need players like McAlister and Dwyer. You need an offensive line that's going to protect your offense, that's going to protect your quarterback. You need these types of players. Yes, you need talent, but you also need a strong-willed team. You also need a team that is going to have mistakes and bounce back because if not, you're a front runner and you cannot be an elite runner, an elite offense and a front runner. Those two things do not go together. You can be a talented offense and a front runner, but you cannot be an elite offense while also being a front runner. When things go bad, like SMU getting a lead in the fourth quarter, how do you respond? TCU responds with 2 touchdowns back to back. TCU responds with a drive where you know they're trying to drip the clock and they still successfully do it. Give you back the ball with less than a minute on the play clock, right? SMU had their moments. They responded, but I didn't see the consistency from their offense. Meanwhile, I thought TCU showed great consistency. I thought TCU showed a lot of consistency on Saturday, but it was interrupted by moments that you wanted back. Maybe it's Eric McAlister having the ball ripped away from him in the end zone. Maybe it was Eric McAlister having points ripped away from him by not getting it reviewed. Even though I guess they told Dykes that it was reviewed. I don't know how it was reviewed and not actually taken to the booth. That was a very close play. Every screenshot I see of it, it looks clear that it was a catch inbounds and should have been a touchdown. So the fact that they didn't even go to the deeper review, they just did essentially a call in the booth or what, I don't know. It was weird. But the point is, you had these moments where things went wrong. I thought in the second half, the SMU defensive line began to get after Hoover a little bit more. And we're going to talk about some of those things in the PFF grades. But I thought they began to get after Hoover. I thought that they began to affect the quarterback. So when I say that TCU struggled, it wasn't all unforced errors. It was some of the Frogs doing. It was some of SMU's doing. Like SMU has a good defensive line. We knew that going into the game. We were prepared for that going into the game. And I think we saw it affect them a little bit later. But once they got rolling, they got rolling. Right? Like these are the things that I think make up elite offenses that don't get discussed a lot. They don't get discussed a lot because all that gets to talked about is, are they an elite offense? Do they score X amount of points? TCU had 14 points taken off the board. Not all referee doing, 7 by the refs, 7 by a really good play by SMU defender. But they had points taken off the board twice, touchdowns taken off the board twice when it looked like they were either going to score or did score. And they still ended up with 35. They didn't get those points back. It's not as if they had a incompletion or a drop pass in the end zone and then they scored on the next play or something. I don't think that they scored at all. If I'm not mistaken, that McAlister catch that wasn't called was a third down play. I think that was a third down play. But you could have easily seen it's been a 40, 50-point game by the Frogs. You could have. But yeah, it's all about resilience. Like I said, you didn't go 6 for 6 again. You didn't have smooth sailing like you did against North Carolina. And guess what? It's not always going to be clean. It's not always going to be smooth. Sometimes you have to find a way to operate within the murk. You have to, in the muck, excuse me. When it's murky, you have to find a way to operate. And we saw that. SMU's defensive line did get after him at times, but for the most part, they kept Hoover clean. And it's not like once SMU started disrupting the quarterback, it just continued and snowballed. They got back on top of the game, and they began to neutralize that pass rush. These are things that you want. An elite offense does not just have talent. Talent makes up an elite offense, but so do the intangibles such as response. So do the intangibles such as mental fortitude. And you have to be able to go when it gets a little bit tougher. You have to. You just have to. So you walk out of that game. Eric McAlister goes for a quarter century. Josh Hoover has a pretty solid game. When we're talking about PFF, we're going to get into him a little bit. I thought Hoover's performance was a little bit better before I looked at the PFF grades. And I still think it's a little better than they said, but they did point out some things. I was like, okay, yeah, I guess that was there. But to me, Hoover put on a performance that was impressive. I thought he put on a performance that had multiple dots. You know what? I need to look to see how many big time throws they had Hoover have. But we're also getting to the point where, I am actually venturing into PFF conversations. So let's move forward and talk about that as we continue with Locked On Horned Frogs. Today's episode is brought to you by Square. And your favorite neighborhood spots run on Square. There are certain businesses that truly make the neighborhood feel like home. Whether it's the local sports bar that's packed on game days that you've been going to since you was going with your pops, or maybe the coffee shop that knows your order by heart. You moved into the neighborhood and wanted to find a good cup of coffee. I have my friend, host of Locked On Saints, Ross Jackson. He loves coffee, so I know that he's always taking advantage of this. Or maybe you talking about the corner deli that has been serving your community for decades. These are the places that bring people together, because when the neighborhood businesses thrives, the whole neighborhood thrives. It's kind of like a place where you walk in and everyone knows your name. The staff is like family, and they've been serving the community for years. That's the type of bond that Square keeps going. Square is the proud partner of over 4 million neighborhood businesses around the world. You can go to square.com/go/lockedoncollege to learn more. But before you do, go support your favorite neighborhood spot. You'll be happy you did. Today's episode is also brought to you by Game Time. And Game Time is the only place that I'm going to buy tickets. I'm trying to go to a Saints game. Might even go to 2. Guess where I'm going to get both of my tickets at? Game Time. It's the only place. If I'm going to a Saints road game, Saints home game, if I'm going to a TCU game, if I'm going to a Cowboys game, going to a Mavericks game, maybe a Rangers game, right? Like Game Time is the place to be. Game time is the place to be. Arizona State, maybe traveling out to Arizona. Game time. It's simple. It doesn't have to be sports related. It could be a monster truck. It could be a ballet. It could be a theater play. It could be any of these things. As long as you need tickets, you can go to Game Time. And I love them because they put everything on Front Street. There's no hidden fees. It's all in pricing. What I see is what I get. The only thing I have to worry about is tax. I get to see my seat from where, or see the view from the seat that I pick. Everything is beautiful. Go to Game Time. And if you haven't used it yet, download the app, create an account, and use the code LOCKEDONCollege to get $20 off your first purchase. As we continue rolling on today's episode of Locked On Horned Frogs, I appreciate you for making this your first listen of the day every day. For your second listen, make sure you're checking out Locked On College Football and Locked On Big 12. We're going to get into our TCU versus Arizona State preview starting tomorrow. So today is Tuesday's episode. We'll be back on this Wednesday, Thursday, Friday, preparing for our Friday kickoff. But right now, I want to still reflect and kind of cap off our reflection. I don't think that we're going to do a lot of it. We may do a little bit tomorrow, but today, Mondays and Tuesdays, I like to really reflect on the previous game. And one of the tools that we use to reflect is the PFF grades. And I think I want to continue to do this on Tuesdays. Let me know what you think. Maybe a Monday deal. But all in all, I think Tuesday is the day for it. I like Monday for more expansive, more original content. But tell me what you think. You think maybe Monday is the time to do PFF grades? Maybe we'll try it out moving forward on Mondays, maybe the next week or two. But anyway, today we're on Tuesday with it. And the offensive grades kind of surprised me. It did. I didn't expect to see the separation that I saw. So we're going to go with the top 3 players and then the bottom 2 players for offense. And we'll do the same thing for defense in segment 3. But Eric McAlister was the top player for offense. I don't think that this came as any surprise. He was the MVP of the game. He was the offensive player of the year. He almost was the player of the week, it feels like, everywhere. I feel like at least 2 to 3 publications or online blogs or whatever made him the player of the game. And I don't think maybe one of them was TCU related, maybe one of them, but the Big 12 had him as one of the players of the week. And I think someone else, but he ends up with PFF giving him an 84.1. Josh Hoover, who was second, is also not surprising. Hoover is a 69.6. And then Colton Deary brings up third at 68.9. But that jump down from McAlister to Hoover was really surprising. Let's start off with McAlister, though. But what's so funny to me is that, of course, we knew he'd be number 1. I'd be shocked if he wasn't number 1 right now. But it's also, when you look at the rankings nationally, the way he's catapulted himself into top 10 conversations in so many statistical categories is funny to me. So he's top 10 in yards per game, not yards total because he's only played 3 games, but he's top 10 in yards per game. I think he's top 10 in touchdowns. You just look at a guy who has been extremely productive in totality this year, except when you watch it, this was the majority of all of those stats. His 3 touchdowns that he has on the year all came from this game. His low 300s in yards, 254 of those came this week. And here's the thing. I don't expect this to be what carries his game, his stats this year. I expect him to be a much more consistent player, but it was nice to have 254 because you kind of just reset yourself. What you did is imagine if he actually had 0 yards, he'd still be averaging 80 yards, 83 yards a game, 84 yards per game, nearly 85 yards per game. If he only had this game. So now he's a little bit closer to the other wide receivers. Now he's a little bit closer, and it's like a reset To me, this is like a reset, and now he can be more consistent moving forward. You'll see him, being Eric McAlister, begin to be in different conversations. And, I thought that had a really strong day. I know they didn't account for the touchdown that wasn't, excuse me. I know they didn't account for the touchdown that wasn't, but all in all, when you put up over 250 yards, you're going to get an 80. Hoover got 69.6. I mean, that's right there on 70, but it's not quite 70, which means PFF does their rankings and it's a tool. I don't think that this grade matches the eye test, but they grade different things, right? I didn't feel like a 70 is average. So that means they had Hoover at slightly below average. And though I don't agree with it, I still think that it's a solid tool to use to break down and look at some different statistical categories. I literally just said this maybe 10 minutes ago. I don't know. Not even 10 minutes ago. I said it 10 seconds ago when talking about McAlister. But one thing that did stand out, because I was like, why did they give him this grade? One thing that did stand out was that he did only complete 55% of his passes. And that does kind of stand out. Another thing is, and this is where I begin to get my biggest disagreement. My biggest disagreement with PFF when grading Josh Hoover's game, and one of the reasons that they probably have him at a 69.6 instead of at least in the 70s, right? Like at least. The biggest difference is I saw big time throws and they didn't. At least one. That first touchdown to Eric McAlister was a big time throw. Sprinting out to his right, throws the ball over a defender. To me, that was a big time throw. So the fact that they had 0 on the grade for him, that is a big reason on why you did not get a high score. This was actually his worst passing game by them. It was the first time that he didn't have a big time throw. It was Hoover's worst passing grade. They also didn't give him much love for running the football. Right? Like this is what I mean. It's just there's an overall disconnect. PFF is not the end all be all, and I don't have to walk it out here as a tool that I always agree with. I strongly disagree with how they look at Josh Hoover. I don't believe that PFF and I saw the same things out of Hoover because you didn't see any big time throws. And I can clearly point to the first Eric McAlister touchdown as a big time throw. They had his running grade pretty low. I thought he showed good running ability. So yeah, that's just a difference in opinion. Colton Deary, though, he had the one thing that no other offensive lineman had pretty much all year, it feels like. A good run blocking grade. A good run blocking grade. I know that sounds crazy, but no one else had done it up to this point. We're going to talk about it in a second, but no one had a good run blocking grade against North Carolina. Doesn't feel like the team didn't. Against Abilene Christian, for sure not. I remember looking at the PFF grades that day. In this one, you see Deary as the only guy who has a good run blocking grade. Everybody else is in the 60s. Everybody else is in the 60s, I believe. Or actually in the 50s and below. So he's not quite, Deary wasn't quite average. He was at 68. So that's slightly below average, but it was in the green. It was a green-ish, right? So that's still a success. Different story for his running mate. Ryan Hughes, not the move. Ryan Hughes had a bad game. He was the lowest graded player on the Horned Frogs that day. And the left tackle, listen, Cameron Robertson is a guy. I think he's very talented. And he was one of the players that we said to watch out for. I didn't think Imba had much of an impact, though I think he had one pressure, maybe half a sack. Because they sacked Hoover twice. And I think Imba was in on one of them. All in all, you did do a good job of neutralizing this talented front. But I did think that Robertson got loose a little bit more than others. And that was typically off the left side. I feel like I remember the first sack being a rush off of the left side of the offensive line. That goes to Hughes. And Hughes was just, he was credited with a 38.2 pass block score. They gave him 5 total pressures, 1 sack, 1 hit, 3 hurries. His run block, worst on the team as far as offensive linemen go. Same with the pass block. So, when you start laying out the factors, you see what changes. And then lastly, you have Chase Curtis. And Curtis was the second lowest grade at 46.3. Hughes was at 45 even. But Curtis is at 46.3. And I thought he was solid in pass block, but he did struggle in run block. And they also gave him a poor passing, but it's really receiving grade, even though he didn't have any targets. So I don't know. I don't have much to say about Chase Curtis and his low PFF grade. He blocked well in the pass game. He didn't in the run game. Yeah, so there's not too much to say there. But let's switch over to defense. And I actually don't even have the lowest guys. I just want to briefly go over the top guys on defense because I think that shows growth in the TCU secondary. So let's take a look at that as we continue with Locked On Horned Frogs. Today's episode is brought to you by Mazda. Mazda crafts cars for those who do more than simply move. Mazda delivers confidence with every ride with more IIHS top safety picks than anyone else as of August 2025. So you feel confident, you feel smooth, you feel comfortable. And I don't know about you, but I would like to feel calm, confident, and smooth in my ride at all times. And Mazda allows me that ability. You can make everyday drives feel like anything but, from smooth handling and intuitive controls that make you feel like a drive to pick up the kids or a drive to the grocery store is some entertaining trek across the country. So you can feel the Japanese craftsmanship with every detail, from the metallic accents to the available leather upholstery. Just like our players, we sweat every detail. Because when you make when you make the impossible feel irrelevant, Mazda is the place to be. Mazda, move and be moved. As we're wrapping up today's episode of Locked On Horned Frogs, I appreciate you for making this your first listen of the day. Every day, making all the way to segment 3, and I thank you 2 times for that. Thank you. Thank you. The defensive grades are inspiring, and I didn't want to water down the inspiration by taking a look at 2 guys who didn't perform well. We'll do that pretty much every week, but the trend of defensive backs in the top 3 to me was a prevailing storyline and really showcased a top-notch improvement. Just like McAlister, you knew who the number 1 guy would be. I didn't have to stress it. You know who the number 1 guy is going to be in this game on the defensive side of the football. It's Jamel Johnson. And Jamel Johnson is a guy who had a few standout plays, for TCU. And he ended the day with a 86.2. It's funny. This is very similar to McAlister, but he ends the day with an 86.2. Javon McIver has a 69.2, and Bud Clark has a 69 even. So you're looking at a real high number 1 guy in the top 80s. Johnson was actually the top graded player on the team. So let's take a look into what happens. And first off, it being 3 defensive backs, really good, because the cornerbacks were called out by Dykes last week. And I know this wasn't all cornerbacks, but to me, the fact that the defensive back room stepped up says a lot. It wasn't all the corners, but the safeties played a part, and I needed the safeties to stand up. I needed to see a better protection over the top. I needed to see Romello Brinson not get loose. These are traits and these are facets of the SMU offense that I was worried you would see be a real crippling trait for the TCU defense. But it wasn't, because you had guys like Bud Clark, because you had guys like McIver and Johnson who were filling holes in the running game where they were taking things away up top. And Johnson had those 2 interceptions. I don't think that really has to be discussed at length. But his coverage grade was an 87.2, and you don't have to wonder why. His tackling, though, was an 84.2, and that was also the highest on the team. His run defense was a 72.1, mostly because of his ability to tackle the ball carrier. Like he didn't have any missed tackles on the day. He had 4 stops. So we can break down Jamel Johnson's game to those 2 interceptions in the clutch. And I do think that is the highlight. And I do think that is what we should lead with. But he also had 4 stops in the run game. We talk about stopping the tandem of Harden and Johnson Jr. Well, you're going to need a whole team effort to do that. And part of that I said before, it does not get enough credit, was the TCU defensive backs running up to stuff holes. And Jamel Johnson was part of that. 4 stops in the run game, meaning these were 4 tackles that resulted in a play that was a quote-unquote offensive failure. So these are stops here. No missed tackles. You look at Bud Clark, no missed tackles. You look at McIver. He had 2 stops and no missed tackles. Like, I think the fact that Bud Clark is attributed with 2 touchdowns, giving up 2 touchdowns. His coverage grade is still a 70. They still had him at average because when he didn't allow a touchdown, he had 4 targets. When he didn't allow those 2 touchdowns, he had 2 PBUs. He was able to actually, Johnson almost picked off a pass the play before he actually had his first interception. That was on a Bud Clark tip in which he broke up the pass. I thought it was a decent throw by Jennings, but it was a tight window and Bud was able to break that up. Bud had an 83.6 tackling grade. So I would say that most of his damage was evenly distributed, though he had a 59.9 run defense, but I thought they played well nonetheless. Why they got Bud at? Did I read Bud's stats wrong? I swear I just looked a second ago. I don't know how that works. They have Bud at 4 targets with 3 completions, but they have him with 2 pass deflections. So maybe they say he wasn't targeted on one of those. But anyway, just really strong performance. And you see that's 3 defensive backs. So in a game where we wanted them to stand up and stand out, or step up and stand out, they did that. Now on tomorrow's episode, TCU's secret weapon does not need to be a secret any longer. I'll expose what that secret is and tell you why TCU needs to start using this a lot more on tomorrow's episode of Locked On Horned Frogs. In the meantime, in between time, until the next time that we hear each other, family, take care, stay blessed. Peace.